Dad stood on the porch, trembling over Grandma's crumpled letter. He froze at the tear where my stepmother grabbed it 3 years ago, the night she beat me. If he had read this before signing his rights away, I would not have been exiled. So, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you stay silent, or would you read that letter aloud, even if the person who hit you was sitting in the front row? My name is Lena Carrington, and if you are watching this from the safety of your living room, I need you to look closely at the man standing on that porch. That is my father, Martin. He is standing under the buzzing yellow light of the front entryway, the only warmth in a freezing ridge field. Ohio winter night. The air is biting, the kind of cold that snaps at your skin and turns your breath into clouds of gray smoke. But he does not seem to feel it. He is too focused on the piece of paper in his hands. It is a letter. It is crumpled, worn soft at the edges, and torn right down the middle of the second page. His hands are shaking, and I know it is not because of the temperature. He is reading the words of a dead woman, words that have been buried under 3 years of lies. I am sitting in my car, the engine cut, the heat ticking as it fades into the silence. I drove 6 hours from Harbor City to get here. I did not turn on the radio once. I just listened to the tires on the asphalt and rehearsed this moment in my head 1,000 times. But now that it is happening, it feels slower than I expected. It feels heavy. If you look past him, past the peeling white paint of the railing and the winter-dead hanging baskets, you might catch a movement in the front window. That is the living room. The curtains are drawn, heavy floral things that have not been changed since the 90s, but there is a shadow pressing against them. That is Valerie, my stepmother. She is lurking there, terrified. She knows exactly what he's reading. She knows because 3 years ago, she was the one who physically tore that letter out of my hands. She is the one who left the bruises on my arms and the split in my lip that forced me to pack my bags and leave this town without a word. I was 27 years old then. I was a grown woman. Yet she put her hands on me like I was a rebellious child she needed to break. And the worst part was that she succeeded, until tonight. They told everyone I was ungrateful. Valerie spun a story that wove itself through the church groups and the grocery store aisles of this small town. She said I was mentally unstable. She said I made up lies about her finances because I wanted money. She painted me as the villain in a story where she was the long-suffering saint trying to hold a family together. But the one person who never got to read the truth, the one person who was carefully steered away from reality, was my father. Have you ever been the subject of a conversation you were not allowed to join? Have you ever sat at a dinner table, feeling the air thicken with secrets that concerned your life, your future, your very sanity, while the adults, or the people who claimed to be the responsible ones, spoke in codes you were not supposed to crack? If you have ever been labeled too sensitive or a troublemaker just because you pointed out a contradiction, I want you to tell me where you are right now. Tell me if you are in Seattle or Boston or Austin. Tell me what time it is, and answer me honestly. Would you have stayed away? Would you have let them keep their comfortable lie? Or would you do what I did? Would you drive back into the lion's den with the one weapon they cannot shout down? Here is the first secret that the people in that house do not know. They think Lena Carrington is a failure. They think I have spent the last 3 years scraping by in the city, probably working waitressing jobs and living in a studio apartment with a leaky ceiling. That is the narrative Valerie loves. It makes her feel superior. It validates her dismissal of me. The reality would shatter her carefully constructed worldview. In Harbor City, I am not the clumsy, emotional stepdaughter. I am the co-founder of Northline Insight. We are a data consultancy firm specializing in supply chain logistics. When I left this town, I poured every ounce of my rage and focus into my work. I stopped trying to be loved, and I started trying to be undeniable. My company just closed a contract with a regional shipping giant last quarter. Northline Insight is currently valued at over $4 million. I wear suits that cost more than Valerie's car. I have a team of 15 people who look to me for answers every single day. But I never told my father. I never posted it on social media. I never sent a Christmas card boasting about my success. Why? Because success is the best armor. but silence is the best trap. I wanted them to underestimate me. I needed them to think I was weak so that when I finally came back, they would not see the blow coming. And the blow is that letter. My grandmother, Eleanor, was not just a sweet old lady who baked cookies and knitted scarves. She was sharp. She saw everything. She saw how Valerie slowly isolated my father. She saw how the money from the joint accounts started disappearing into household expenses that never seemed to manifest in the house itself. She saw how I was being pushed to the margins of my own life when she died. She did not just leave a will. She left a roadmap. She left a forensic accounting of the emotional and financial theft that had been happening under my father's nose for a decade. The letter Dad is reading right now explains the structure of the Eleanor Legacy Trust. It details exactly how much money was left, where it is, and the specific conditions required to access it. But there is a clause Valerie tried to bury. A clause that states, if any heir attempts to use force, coercion, or physical intimidation to prevent the beneficiary, me, from accessing the information, they are to be immediately stripped of all rights to the estate. Valerie thought she could beat the truth out of me. She thought if she hit me hard enough, if she screamed loud enough about me being a liar, the letter would disappear. She ripped it. She hid the pieces. She thought she had won. But she forgot that Grandma Eleanor was a woman who wrote everything down. She forgot that lawyers keep copies. And she forgot that the bruised girl she chased out of the house 3 years ago would eventually heal. And that girl would come back as a woman who analyzes risk and data for a living. I watched the scene on the porch unfold like a slow-motion car crash. Dad flipped to the second page. This was it. This was the section where Grandma detailed the specific dates and amounts of the checks Valerie had forged. This was the section where she explicitly wrote, "Martin, if you are reading this, it means Lena has finally found a way to get this to you, likely against great resistance." I saw his shoulders slump. It was a physical collapse, as if the weight of the wood and siding of the house was suddenly resting entirely on his spine. He read the same line twice. I could tell by the way his head moved back, a jerky, confused motion. He was looking for a misunderstanding. He was looking for a way to interpret the words that did not involve his wife being a monster and his daughter being a victim. But Grandma Eleanor did not write in riddles. She wrote in hard, cold facts. I confessed something to myself right then, gripping the leather steering wheel of my car. I had let that slap 3 years ago define me for too long. I had let the humiliation of being physically attacked in my childhood home drive me into exile. I told myself I was leaving to protect my peace. But really, I was leaving because I was afraid he would not believe me. I was afraid I would stand there, bleeding, and he would still choose her. That fear had ruled me. It dictated my silence. But a data analyst knows that you cannot make accurate projections with missing data. My father had been operating with missing data for 10 years. I took a breath. The air in the car felt thin. On the porch, Dad lowered the letter. He did not crumple it this time. He folded it, very carefully, along the original creases, treating it like a holy relic. Then, he lifted his head. He looked out into the dark driveway. He could not see me clearly through the windshield in the night, but he knew I was there. I had told him I was coming. I had told him I had something of Grandma's that he needed to see. The look on his face broke my heart and healed it all at the same time. It was not the look of the father I grew up with. It was not the tired, passive man who just wanted everyone to get along. It was the look of a man waking up from a coma. He looked at me like I was a stranger, and in a way, he was meeting his daughter for the first time in years. He was seeing the survivor, not the troublemaker. He was seeing the woman who had built a multi-million-dollar company out of spite and grit, waiting for him to catch up. But to understand why a single letter had the power to shake the foundation of this house, to understand why a grown woman would tremble at the sight of her stepmother's shadow. We cannot stay here in the cold. We have to go back. We have to go back to the beginning, to the day the warmth left this house, the day I lost my mother and gained a new one I never asked for. The cold in Ridgefield has a specific weight to it. It does not just lower the temperature, It presses down on the roofs and the white picket fences until everything feels brittle enough to snap. I grew up in one of those quiet suburbs where the silence was supposed to be peaceful, but in our house, the silence was heavy. It was a silence full of things unsaid. My childhood was divided into two distinct eras, the before and the after. The demarcation line was the winter my mother died. I was 10 or 11 years old enough to understand the permanence of loss, but too young to know how to navigate the wreckage it left behind. When she passed, the color seemed to drain out of our small wooden house. My father, Martin, did not know how to grieve with a child. He did not know how to look at me and not see the woman he had just buried. So, he stopped looking. He retreated into the garage behind the house, burying himself in the grease and metal of old engines, fixing things that were broken because he could not fix us. For 2 years, it was just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant clanking of Dad's wrench. The only person who crossed the bridge of silence to reach me was my grandmother, Eleanor. She was my mother's mother, and she carried her grief differently. She carried it like a lantern. She came over every day to make sure I was not just surviving, but living. She taught me how to read, not just words, but the rhythm of sentences. She taught me how to chop carrots for soup without slicing my fingers. And most importantly, she taught me the art of letter writing. People forget what they say. Lena. She told me once, her hand guiding mine over a piece of stationery. But ink remembers. If you want something to be true forever, you write it down. We wrote to each other even though we lived 10 minutes apart. It was our practice. It was our way of building a world that was just ours. Then came the era of Valerie. I was 13 or 14 when Dad brought her home. She was a woman who seemed to have been manufactured in a factory for perfect suburban wives. Her hair was always stiff with hairspray. Her clothes were pastel and pressed, and she had a smile that appeared on command, like a light switch being flipped. She brought with her a son, Kyle, who was the same age as me but took up twice as much space. Valerie moved into our house and immediately began an aggressive campaign of renovation. The old, comfortable furniture my mother had picked out was hauled away to the dump. The walls were painted a sterile beige. The photos of my mother were taken down from the mantelpiece because, as Valerie put it in her soft, breathy voice, "We want to focus on the future, don't we, Martin?" Dad just nodded. He always just nodded. He was so relieved to have someone else managing the household, managing the silence, that he did not notice, or chose not to notice, that she was managing me right out of existence. To the neighbors, Valerie was a saint. She baked casseroles for the church potluck. She stood in the driveway and laughed with the other mothers, referring to me as our daughter. But the moment the front door clicked shut, the mask slipped. It was not a dramatic transformation. She did not scream or throw things. That would have been easier to deal with because it would have been obvious. Her cruelty was quiet. It was domestic. It lived in the kitchen and the laundry room. She never called me Lena when we were alone. I became she or that girl or simply you. "Is she still in her room?" Valerie would ask the air while I was standing right there filling a glass of water. Honestly, it is like living with a ghost. Kyle, on the other hand, was allowed to be anything but a ghost. He was loud. He played video games in the living room with the volume turned up until the floorboards vibrated. He left his muddy sneakers in the hallway. He broke a vase once, a nice one, and Valerie just laughed, sweeping up the shards. "Boys will be boys," she chirped. "They have so much energy." A week later, I left a book on the coffee table, just a single paperback novel. Valerie held it up like it was a piece of garbage she had found rotting in the sun. "Lena," she said, her voice dropping to that disappointed register she reserved exclusively for me. "You are older than Kyle. You are a young woman. You should know how to keep a common area tidy. I expect more maturity from you." That became the trap. I was mature, so I had to do the dishes while Kyle watched TV. I was mature, so I had to fold the laundry, including Kyle's and Valerie's, while they went out for ice cream. I was mature, so I did not need affection or praise. The favoritism was so subtle that if you tried to explain it to an outsider, you would sound petty, but living in it felt like dying by 1,000 paper cuts. I remember coming home one afternoon in ninth grade. I had aced a difficult math exam, the kind the teacher said half the class would fail. I was proud. I felt a spark of that old warmth in my chest. I walked into the kitchen where Valerie was chopping vegetables and Dad was drinking a beer, fresh from the garage. "Dad," I said, putting the paper on the island. "I got a 98 on the calculus midterm." Dad looked up, his eyes tired, a smile starting to form. "That is great. Lee, that is really—" "Kyle made the junior varsity basketball team," Valerie interrupted. She did not even look up from her cutting board. The knife hit the wood with a rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack. "The coach said he has natural athleticism. We need to go buy him those new sneakers. Martin, the expensive ones. He earned them." Dad's smile faltered. He looked at Valerie, then at me, then at his beer. "That is good for Kyle," he mumbled. "But the test," I said, my voice small. "It is the highest grade in the class." Valerie finally stopped chopping. She turned to me, wiping her hands on a towel, her expression one of pitying amusement. "Oh, honey," she said, "grades do not feed anyone. You need to learn how to interact with people, like Kyle does. Being book smart is fine, but do not let it make you weird. You are already so quiet." I looked at Dad. I begged him with my eyes to say something, to say that being smart mattered, to say that I mattered. He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "Valerie is just saying, we want you to be well-rounded. Lena, don't make a big deal out of it." Don't make a big deal out of it. That was the family motto. Grandma Eleanor saw it, though. She saw the way I flinched when Valerie walked into a room. She saw how I had stopped talking at dinner, how I ate as fast as I could just to excuse myself and run upstairs. One Sunday, while I was in the backyard of Grandma's house helping her weed the garden, I heard her talking to Dad in the kitchen through the screen door. "She is disappearing, Martin," Grandma said. Her voice was not gentle. It was sharp, like the winter wind. "You are letting that woman erase your daughter in her own home. Lena is fading away." "You are exaggerating, Ma," Dad replied, his voice defensive. "Valerie is tough on her. Sure, but Lena needs structure. She is fine. She is strong. She can handle it." "She is a child," Grandma snapped. "She should not have to be strong enough to handle being a stranger in her father's house." "I have to keep the peace, Ma," Dad said, and I could hear the defeat in his tone. "I just need peace." I stopped weeding. I looked down at the dirt on my hands. I realized then that Dad was not going to save me. He was too afraid of shattering the fragile calm Valerie had constructed. If he defended me, Valerie would make his life cold and difficult. So I became the sacrifice he made for his own comfort. I learned to shrink. I learned that being invisible was safer than being seen. I spent my evenings in my room, the door locked, reading books that took me to places where justice actually existed. I avoided the living room. I avoided the kitchen when she was there. I became exactly what she accused me of being, a ghost. But I had my outlet. On Tuesday nights, I would walk the 1.5 miles to Grandma's house. Those evenings were my sanctuary. The house smelled like lavender and old paper. We would sit at her small kitchen table, and we would write. It became a ritual, almost religious in its consistency. We had a secret. Behind her house, there was an old, gnarled maple tree with roots that twisted up from the ground like knuckles. Buried beneath a loose patch of soil and covered by a flat rock was a metal tin box. It used to hold Danish butter cookies, but now it held our souls. "We write the things we cannot say," Grandma whispered to me one night as we crouched by the tree roots, our breath visible in the cold air. "If you are angry, write it. If you are hurt, write it, and we put it here. The earth can hold it better than we can." I wrote letters to my mother. I wrote letters to the version of my father that used to exist. I wrote letters to my future self, begging her to come and get me. We folded them up and placed them in the tin, a growing archive of pain and hope that Valerie could not touch, could not criticize, and could not throw away. It was the only thing I owned that felt real. The breaking point of my childhood, or rather, the moment I realized I had no childhood left, happened when I was 16. It was Christmas Eve. The snow was falling heavily, blanketing Ridgefield in white. I had walked over to Grandma's earlier in the day to drop off a gift, but I had to come back for the family dinner that Valerie insisted on. I walked up the driveway, shivering in my coat. The lights in the living room were blazing. The curtains were open, framing the scene inside like a stage play. I stopped. I could not make my feet move. Inside, the fire was crackling in the hearth. A massive Christmas tree stood in the corner, glittering with gold and red ornaments. Valerie's color scheme, of course. Dad was sitting in his armchair, a glass of eggnog in his hand, laughing at something Kyle had said. Kyle was sitting on the floor, surrounded by torn wrapping paper, holding up a new gaming console. His face lit up with triumph. Valerie was leaning over Dad's shoulder, smiling that perfect camera-ready smile, looking at Kyle with pure adoration. They looked like a family. They looked complete. And then I looked at the dining table. There were 4 chairs, but on the chair that was usually mine, the one in the corner, furthest from the head of the table, there was no place setting. There was no plate, no napkin. Instead, the chair was piled high with boxes, overflow gifts, boxes of kitchen appliances Valerie had bought for herself, coats for Kyle, things that did not fit under the tree. My seat had been turned into a storage shelf. I stood there in the snow, the cold seeping through the soles of my boots. I watched them for a long time. I watched Dad top off his drink. I watched Valerie ruffle Kyle's hair. No one looked at the clock. No one looked at the front door. No one wondered where I was. They had not just forgotten me. They had replaced me. My absence was not a hole in their evening. It was a convenience. It gave them more room for their things. I turned away from the window. I did not go inside. Not yet. I walked around to the back of the house, to the dark, freezing garage where Dad used to hide, and I sat on an old tire. I did not cry. Tears were for people who believed things could be fixed. I just sat there and let the cold settle into my bones, hardening everything inside me. That was the night I decided that if I was going to be invisible, I would use it. I would be the things they could not see coming. But back then, sitting in the dark, I was just a girl who knew that the warm, lit-up room on the other side of the wall was a country I had been deported from, and I had no idea how to get back in. If that Christmas Eve taught me anything, it was that waiting for a seat at the table was a waste of time. I had to build my own table. I stopped looking for affection in that house and started looking for leverage. For me, leverage looked like mathematics. It looked like data science. While Valerie was busy orchestrating the perfect suburban life, and Kyle was busy destroying level after level in his video games, I was upstairs, decoding the world. I realized early on that numbers were the only things in my life that did not lie to me. Numbers did not have favorites. They did not smile to your face and insult you behind your back. A variable was a variable. If the equation balanced, you won. It was a clean, cold justice that I could control. Throughout high school, Valerie's voice was a constant background radiation. She would lean against the doorframe while I was studying, holding a basket of laundry that she never intended to fold herself. "You know, Lena," she would say, picking at a loose thread on her sweater, "girls really should be practical. All this advanced calculus is fine for a hobby, I suppose, but you need to think about your future. There is a nice administrative assistant program at the community college in town. You could live here, save money, help out with the house. It is safe." Safe, that was her code word for controlled. She wanted me close enough to be useful, but not successful enough to outshine her son. Every time she told me to aim lower, I added another hour to my study schedule. I did not do it alone, though. Grandma Eleanor was running a shadow operation right under their noses. Every Tuesday, when I went over to her house, she would press something into my palm. Sometimes it was a $5 bill. sometimes a 20. "Put this in the account, Lena," she would whisper, her eyes sharp and conspiring. "This is the one-way ticket fund." She had helped me open a student savings account that was paperless, so no statements would ever arrive at my father's house for Valerie to intercept. That money was not an allowance. It was an escape hatch. It was coffee money she saved, change from the grocery store, little slivers of her pension that she diverted toward my freedom. The explosion happened in the spring of my senior year. I remember the day the envelope arrived. It was thick, bearing the crest of Ashford University. I had applied in secret, using Grandma's address. When I brought it to the dinner table, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. "I got in," I said, breaking the silence over the meatloaf. "Ashford University, full academic scholarship for the data science program." The fork froze halfway to Dad's mouth. He looked at me, blinking, trying to process the words. "Scholarship? Full?" "Everything," I said, my voice gaining strength. "Tuition, books, I just have to pay for room and board." Valerie did not freeze. She stiffened. She set her knife down with a deliberate, sharp clatter. "Ashford?" she said, her voice pitching up into that fake concern that made my skin crawl. "But Lena, that is in the Northeast. That is 600 miles away. In a city, it is incredibly dangerous." "It is a university, Valerie, not a war zone," I replied, keeping my eyes on Dad. "But what about your father?" She turned to him, placing a manicured hand on his arm. "Martin, she is talking about leaving us, just abandoning the family. Who is going to help with the garden this summer? Who is going to drive Kyle to practice when we are busy? It is selfish, isn't it? To take a scholarship meant for needy people when she has a perfectly good home here?" She was twisting the knife, trying to make my success sound like a moral failure. She wanted Dad to feel abandoned so he would guilt me into staying. I looked at my father. This was his moment. This was his chance to say, "My daughter is brilliant, and she is going somewhere." He looked at Valerie's hand on his arm. Then he looked at his plate. He sighed, the sound of a man who had surrendered long ago. "It is far away, Lee," he mumbled, "and room and board is expensive. I don't know if we can swing that kind of cash right now. Maybe Val is right. Maybe you do a year here first. Get your bearings." He trailed off. He could not even look me in the eye. He was effectively asking me to set my future on fire to keep his wife warm. I stood up. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just picked up my letter. "I am going," I said. "I have the savings from Grandma. I will work. I am not staying here." I walked out of the kitchen while Valerie started listing the crime rates in the Northeast to the empty air. The next day, I went to Grandma's. I was fuming, pacing back and forth on her porch. "They want me to stay," I told her. "Dad won't even look at me." Grandma Eleanor was sitting in her rocking chair, snapping beans into a bowl. She stopped and reached out, grabbing my wrist with a grip that was surprisingly strong for a woman in her 70s. "Lena, look at me," she commanded. I stopped pacing. "Go," she said. "One word. Simple. Absolute. If you stay in that house, you will die. Not your body, but the light inside you. If you have to ask for permission just to breathe, then that place is not your home. It is a cage." 2 months later, I left. I did not get a send-off party. Valerie made sure the day I left was treated like any other Tuesday. Dad was at work. He had said a mumbled goodbye that morning, slipping me a $50 bill like he was dealing drugs. Terrified Valerie would see. Grandma Eleanor was the only one at the Greyhound station. It was 11 at night. The bus station smelled of diesel fumes and stale tobacco. The idling engine of the bus sounded like a giant, growling beast, but to me, it sounded like music. Grandma pulled me into a hug that smelled of lavender and resilience. She was small in my arms, and for the first time, I felt a pang of terror. I was leaving her behind with them. "Don't you worry about me," she said, pulling back and pressing a small envelope into my hand. "I have been handling Valerie since before you were born. You just run. Run and don't look back until you are standing on a mountain. I will call you every Sunday, I promised, clutching my single suitcase. Read this when you miss the house too much, she said, tapping the envelope. Now get on that bus. I climbed the steps. As the bus pulled away, lurching onto the highway, I watched her figure standing under the flickering halogen light of the station platform. She waved once, sharp and decisive, then turned and walked to her car. I didn't know it then, but that was the image I would hold on to for the rest of my life. Ashford University was a shock to the system. It was a world of old brick buildings and students who drove cars that cost more than my father's house. I was the girl with the second-hand coat and the laptop that overheated if I opened too many tabs. I realized very quickly that a full tuition scholarship did not cover the cost of existing. My one-way ticket fund got me there and paid for my first month of rent in a shared off-campus apartment that smelled perpetually of mildew, but I needed more to survive. I stopped sleeping. Sleep became a luxury I could not afford, from 5 in the morning until 10. I worked at a campus coffee shop, scalding my hands on espresso machines and smiling at students who looked through me like I was furniture, from 10 until 4. I was in class, absorbing statistics and algorithms like a sponge, and from 6 in the evening until midnight, I worked in the university data center, monitoring server racks in a freezing cold room. I lived on instant ramen and the free pastries that were going stale at the coffee shop. I slept on a futon that I had found on the sidewalk. I was exhausted constantly. My bones ached, my eyes burned, and I had never been happier. For the first time in my life, nobody was telling me I was too loud, or too quiet, or taking up too much space. My exhaustion was my own. My hunger was my own. I was building something brick by brick. It was in my junior year that I found my calling. I took a logistics elective on a whim, and suddenly, the chaos of the world arranged itself into lines and nodes in my head. I could look at a shipping manifest and see the inefficiencies glowing like neon signs. I could see where time was bleeding out of a supply chain. I managed to talk my way into an internship at a tiny startup called Rootwave Labs. It was 5 guys in a basement trying to write code to optimize trucking routes. They could not pay me, but they said I could have equity if the company ever made $1. You see things backwards. The founder, a guy named Marcus, told me one night while we were debugging code at 2 in the morning, "Most people look at the road. You look at the empty space between the trucks." "The empty space is where the money is lost," I said, drinking my 5th cup of cheap office coffee. I became obsessed. I worked harder for that unpaid internship than I did for my actual classes. I was analyzing datasets that were millions of rows deep, finding patterns that saved our first client 10% on fuel costs in a single month. That was the moment I knew I was going to be rich. Not just comfortable, rich, because I held the map that everyone else was trying to read in the dark. Meanwhile, back in Ridgefield, Valerie was curating a fictional life on social media. I would check her profile sometimes, a habit I could not quite break. There were photos of date night with Dad at the Italian restaurant I loved, but we never went to because it was too expensive. There were photos of Kyle on a ski trip that must have cost thousands of dollars. "So proud of my boys," the captions would say. There was never a mention of me. No missing Lena at college. No proud of our daughter for making the dean's list. It was as if I had been photoshopped out of the family portrait. But I had something better than a Facebook post. I had Grandma's letters. They arrived like clockwork every Thursday. Her handwriting was spidery but firm. She wrote about the garden, how the hydrangeas were blooming, how the frost had killed the early tomatoes. She wrote about her health in vague terms. "The old ticker is skipping a beat now and then, just like a jazz drummer." And in every single letter, folded tightly into the lined paper, there was a check. Sometimes it was for $50, sometimes $100. Once, it was for $300 with a note. "I sold that old ugly lamp Valerie hated. Buy yourself a winter coat. P.S. Do not tell your father." She would always write at the bottom. Those letters were my lifeline. I would sit in my cramped room, surrounded by textbooks and server logs, and read them until the paper grew soft. They were the only proof I had that I came from somewhere, that someone remembered my name. I remember one night specifically. It was a Tuesday in November. I was eating soup out of a mug, sitting on my lumpy futon, reading her latest letter. Outside, the city rain was hammering against the glass. "The maple tree is losing its leaves early this year," she wrote. "The box is still there. Lena, it is waiting for you. Remember, you are building a house of stone while they are still living in a house of straw. Be patient." I ran my thumb over the ink. I thought about the checks. I thought about how she was sending me scraps of her pension to keep me afloat. I felt a surge of gratitude so fierce it made my throat tight. I thought she was doing everything she could. I thought these $20 and $50 checks were the extent of her rebellion against Valerie. I had no idea. I sat there in my drafty apartment, feeling lucky to have $100 extra for groceries, completely unaware that the woman writing to me about hydrangeas and old lamps was in the middle of orchestrating a legal masterstroke that would one day bring an entire family to its knees. I thought she was just my grandmother. I did not know she was my general. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in October. The leaves outside the library window at Ashford were turning that brilliant, burning orange that always reminded me of the maple tree in Grandma's backyard. But inside, the air was stagnant and smelled of old dust. I was studying for a midterm on predictive algorithms when my phone buzzed against the wooden table. It was a number I did not recognize, but the area code was Ridgefield. I answered it in the hallway. The voice on the other end was clinical, detached, the kind of voice that delivers bad news for a living. It was a doctor from Ridgefield Memorial. He told me that Eleanor had been admitted with severe congestive heart failure. He used words like ejection fraction and fluid retention, but all I heard was that the only person in the world who loved me was dying. I did not think. I reacted. I had exactly $42 in my bank account. I ran to my roommate's dorm room and begged her to lend me $300 for a plane ticket. I promised to pay her back with interest, offering to do her laundry for a semester. Anything. She saw the look on my face and just handed me her credit card. I flew into the nearest city and took a shuttle bus the rest of the way. By the time I reached the hospital, it was dark. My chest felt tight, like there was a physical band of iron constricting my lungs. When I walked into the waiting room, the first thing I saw was Valerie. She was flipping through a magazine, looking bored. Dad was sitting next to her, staring at his shoes, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. Kyle was there too, playing a game on his phone with the sound off, tapping the screen aggressively. Valerie looked up and saw me. Her expression did not soften, it tightened. "Oh," she said, "you are here. That was fast." "Where is she?" I asked, ignoring the tone. "She is resting." "Lena," Valerie said, standing up and smoothing out her skirt. "The doctor said she needs quiet. Honestly, you didn't need to fly all this way and disrupt your studies. We have everything under control." "She is my grandmother," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I am going in." I did not wait for her permission. I pushed past her and went to the nurse's station. 5 minutes later, I was standing in the doorway of room 304. Grandma Eleanor looked so small. That was the first thing that hit me. She had always been a force of nature, a woman who seemed taller than she actually was because of her spine and her spirit. But lying in that hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines and plastic tubes, she looked fragile. Her skin was the color of parchment paper. She opened her eyes when I stepped in. A smile, weak but genuine, spread across her face. "Well," she whispered, her voice raspy, "look who escaped the ivory tower." I rushed to the side of the bed and took her hand. It felt cold and thin, like holding a dried leaf. "I came as soon as I heard. Why didn't you tell me you were sick?" "I am not sick," she said, squeezing my fingers with a surprising amount of strength. "I am just giving the old ticker a coffee break. It has been beating for 78 years. It deserves a nap." She was joking, but her eyes were serious. She looked over my shoulder. Dad and Valerie had followed me in. hovering by the door like uneasy ghosts. "Martin," Grandma said. "Valerie, take the boy and go get some coffee. I want to talk to my granddaughter. Alone." Valerie bristled. "Mother, the doctor said you shouldn't overexert yourself. We should stay—" "Go," Grandma said. It wasn't a shout, but it had the authority of a command. "I am dying. Valerie, not deaf. I want 5 minutes with Lena. Unless you want me to use my last breath to discuss your credit card bill?" Valerie's face went pale. She grabbed Dad's arm. "Come on, Martin, let us let them have their moment." She dragged him out, Kyle trailing behind them, looking annoyed that he had to move. When the door clicked shut, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The humor dropped from Grandma's face. She pulled me closer. "Lock the door, Lena," she said. I frowned but did as she asked. When I came back to the bed, she was reaching under her pillow. She pulled out a thick envelope. It was white with a distinct dark blue border, on the front, in her handwriting. It said, "For Lena, to be read only when the time is right." "Listen to me very carefully," she said, her voice low and urgent. "This is not just a letter. This is your shield." I took the envelope. It felt heavy. "Grandma, what is this?" "It is a letter from me. But inside, there are documents prepared by my lawyer, Mr. Addison Pierce. You do not know him, but he is a good man. He is the only man in this town I trust besides your grandfather. God rest his soul." She took a breath, the heart monitor beeping a little faster. "I have changed my will. Lena, the house, the maple tree, the savings accounts I have kept separate from the family pot. All of it. I am putting it into a trust, the Eleanor Legacy Trust." My eyes widened. "Grandma, you can't— Valerie will—" "Valerie will scream," Grandma cut in. "Valerie will rage. But Valerie will not get a single dime if she does not follow the rules." She looked me dead in the eye. "I have transferred the ownership of the house and the land to this trust, and you are the sole beneficiary, but there are conditions, strict ones." She paused, gathering her strength. "I know what goes on in that house, Lena. I know you think I only saw the surface, but I saw the bruises you tried to hide with long sleeves. I saw how she looked at you when she thought no one was watching. I know she bullies your father, and I know she scares you." Tears pricked my eyes. I had never told her the extent of it. I thought I was protecting her. "The trust has a specific clause," Grandma continued. "Addison calls it the protective provision. I call it the keep your hands off clause. If anyone, and I mean anyone, including your father or his wife, uses physical force, intimidation, or coercion to prevent you from accessing this inheritance or reading my final instructions, the trust immediately locks them out, completely. They lose any right to contest, any right to the small stipend I left for your father, everything." I stared at the envelope in my hand. "Why?" I whispered. "Why go to all this trouble?" "Because I suspect things. Lena," she said darkly. "I suspect Valerie has been bleeding your father dry for years. I have seen checks with my signature that I never signed. I have seen withdrawals from the joint account that do not make sense, but suspicion is not proof. I ran out of time to catch her in the act." She gripped my hand so hard her knuckles turned white. "This letter," she nodded at the envelope, "lays it all out. It tells you where to look. It tells you which accounts to audit. It is the map to the truth. And Valerie knows enough to be terrified of what I might have written down." "She will try to take it," I said, a cold fear washing over me. "If she knows—" "That is why you do not read it here," Grandma said sternly. "You do not read it at the funeral. You do not read it in that house. You wait. You wait until you are in a place where you feel safe, and you keep this envelope hidden. Do not tell your father. He is a good man. Lena, but he is weak. He will tell her to keep the peace, and she will destroy it." Suddenly, there was a soft knock on the door. Not the main door, but the connecting door to the bathroom. I jumped. Grandma didn't flinch. "Come in, Addison," she called out. The door opened, and a tall, gray-haired man in a suit stepped out. He was holding a small camcorder, It was Addison Pierce. He had been hiding in the bathroom the whole time. "I am sorry for the theatrics. Lena," Mr. Pierce said softly, but Eleanor insisted we have a backup. "We are going to record this," Grandma said, sitting up a little straighter. "Addison has the original copy of the letter, you have the second copy, and this video will be the third." Mr. Pierce lifted the camera. The red light blinked on. Grandma looked into the lens. She took a deep breath, and for a moment, she did not look sick. She looked regal. She began to speak. She recited the contents of the letter I was holding. She spoke about her love for me, her disappointment in how the family had fractured, and her specific instructions regarding the trust. Then, she leaned forward, staring right into the camera, her eyes blazing with a fierce, protective fire. "And to my son, Martin, and his wife, Valerie," she said, her voice steady, "if you are watching this, it means you have tried to challenge my wishes. Hear me now. If one hand is raised against my granddaughter, if one threat is whispered to make her afraid to claim what is hers, you will be left with nothing. I have spent my life building this legacy. Do not test me from the grave." She turned to me, ignoring the camera now. "Lena, honey?" "Yes, Grandma," I choked out. "If a day comes when someone hits you just because you dared to read what belongs to you," she said, her voice softening but losing none of its intensity, "I want you to remember something. I did not leave you defenseless. I calculated that moment. If they hit you, they are not hurting you. They are signing their own eviction notice. Remember that." Mr. Pierce lowered the camera. "We have it, Eleanor." "Good," she exhaled, sinking back into the pillows, suddenly exhausted. "Now, Lena, hide that envelope, put it in your bag, deep down, and unlock the door. We have to let the vultures back in." I did as she asked. I buried the blue-bordered envelope at the bottom of my backpack, under my textbooks and my laptop. I unlocked the corridor door. Valerie and Dad came back in almost immediately, looking suspicious. Valerie's eyes darted around the room, lingering on Mr. Pierce. "Mr. Pierce?" Valerie asked, her voice tight. "What are you doing here?" "Just paying my respects to an old friend, Mrs. Carrington," Addison said smoothly, slipping the camera into his briefcase, "and discussing some final arrangements for the church service. Eleanor wants specific hymns." It was a lie, but it was a boring enough lie that Valerie bought it. She relaxed, just a fraction. I stayed for 2 more hours, holding Grandma's hand until she fell asleep. I wanted to stay forever. I wanted to drop out of school and sleep in the chair next to her bed, but I had exams. I had the scholarship to maintain. Grandma had made me promise, fiercely, that I would not let my grades slip because of her. "Go back," she had whispered before drifting off. "Finish what you started. The house isn't going anywhere." I flew back to Ashford the next morning. The flight felt like a blur. I felt heavy, burdened with a secret that felt radioactive in my backpack. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in the library again. It was snowing outside. My phone buzzed. It was a text message from Valerie. No phone call, no voice, just text on a screen. "Mom passed away an hour ago. Funeral is on Saturday." That was it. 7 words to end a life. 7 words to tell me that the only person who had ever truly seen me was gone. I sat there in the silence of the library, staring at the phone until the screen went black. I felt a profound, crushing sense of lateness. I was too late. I was hundreds of miles away, surrounded by books and data, while the woman who had taught me to read them died with only Valerie and my father in the room. I thought about the envelope hidden in my dorm room. I thought about the protective provision. Grandma had prepared for a war, but sitting there, feeling the tears finally spill over onto my notebook, I didn't want a war. I just wanted to hear her call me honey one more time. I packed my bag. I booked another ticket. I was going back to Ridgefield. But this time, I wasn't going back as the granddaughter. I was going back as the beneficiary, and I was terrified because I knew that the moment I stepped foot on that porch, the clock would start ticking on the explosion Grandma had set in motion. The funeral of Eleanor Vance was a masterclass in performance art, directed by and starring my stepmother, Valerie. The service took place at the small Baptist church on the edge of Ridgefield, the same one Grandma had attended for 40 years. But looking at the front pew, you would have thought it was Valerie who had lost a mother, not my father, and certainly not me. Valerie wore a black dress that was slightly too fashionable for a somber occasion, complete with a wide-brimmed hat and a lace veil that she dabbed at theatrically with a silk handkerchief. She positioned herself at the center of every interaction. When the neighbors came to offer condolences, she was the one shaking their hands, nodding tragically, and accepting their casseroles. She narrated Grandma's life to people who had known Eleanor decades longer than she had. "She was such a difficult woman at the end," Valerie whispered loudly to the choir director. "But I did my best. We sacrifice for family, don't we?" I, on the other hand, was invisible. Or rather, I was visible only as a utility. While Valerie held court, I was relegated to the back of the church hall. I made the coffee. I set out the paper napkins. I arranged the folding chairs. I was the granddaughter of the deceased, yet I was moving through the room like a caterer. My father stood by the door, looking gray and hollowed out, shaking hands mechanically. His eyes glazed over. He did not tell Valerie to stop. He did not tell me to sit down and grieve. He just let the dynamic play out, exactly as it always had. After the burial, a small group of us gathered in the church's meeting room for the reading of the will. It was just Dad, Valerie, me, and Mr. Addison Pierce. Kyle was not there. He was away at a sports camp. Or maybe Valerie had just told him not to come because funerals were boring. I was grateful for his absence. This was a volatile chemical reaction waiting to happen, and we did not need a catalyst. Mr. Pierce sat at the head of the table, his demeanor cool and professional. He did not look at Valerie. He opened a leather folder and began to read. "The entirety of the estate," Mr. Pierce stated, his voice devoid of emotion, "including the property at 42 Maple Lane, the land, and all liquid assets, is to be transferred immediately into the Eleanor Legacy Trust." Valerie leaned forward, her brow furrowing. "Trust? What trust? Martin is the next of kin. The sole beneficiary of the trust is Lena Carrington." Mr. Pierce continued, ignoring her interruption. "Martin Carrington is named as the temporary trustee to oversee the transfer of physical assets, a role that will expire once the paperwork is finalized." The silence in the room was absolute. I watched Valerie's face. For a split second, the mask shattered. Her eyes widened, and her mouth opened in a silent gasp of pure panic. She looked at Dad, waiting for him to explode. But Dad just nodded. "Okay," he said softly. "That sounds like something Ma would do." Valerie recovered quickly. She forced a laugh, a brittle, high-pitched sound that bounced off the linoleum floor. "Well, of course," she said, smoothing her skirt. "That is wonderful. Lena deserves a head start. God knows she needs the help. And really, it is just that old wooden house. It is falling apart anyway. We probably would have had to pay someone to take it off our hands." She was trying to diminish the value of the gift, trying to act like she did not care. But I saw the way her hands were trembling in her lap. She knew the old wooden house sat on 3 acres of land that developers had been eyeing for years. She knew exactly what she had just lost. Life moved on. I went back to the city, back to my data, back to building my company. But the unfinished business of the house pulled at me. A few months later, on a humid Saturday in July, I drove back to Ridgefield. The task was simple. Clean out Grandma's bedroom. Dad said he couldn't bring himself to do it, and Valerie had surprisingly volunteered to let Lena handle her own memories. The house smelled stale, like dust and trapped heat. Dad was at work, and Valerie was in the garden, aggressively pruning her rose bushes. I walked up the stairs to Grandma's room. It looked exactly as it had the day she went to the hospital. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand. I opened the closet door. On the top shelf, pushed all the way to the back, was the tin box. the Danish butter cookie tin. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled it down and sat on the edge of the bed. Inside were the letters we had written to each other over the years, a paper trail of my childhood survival, and resting on top of them was a thick, blue-bordered envelope. This was it. The letter Addison Pierce had mailed to the house address as per the will's instructions, which I had intercepted and hidden in this box during a previous quick visit, knowing I needed a quiet moment to process it, or perhaps Grandma had left a duplicate here, just in case. It had my name on it in Grandma's shaky script. I was 23 years old. I was a college graduate. I was a business owner. But sitting there, holding that envelope, I felt like a frightened child again. I stood up and walked to the door. I turned the lock, but the mechanism was old and stiff. It didn't quite click into place. I figured it was fine. Valerie was outside. I sat down on the wooden chair by the window, took a deep breath, and slid my finger under the flap of the envelope. I had just pulled out the stack of papers, my eyes scanning the first paragraph where Grandma described the specific bank account numbers she suspected Valerie had drained, when the door flew open. There was no knock, no hesitation. Valerie stood in the doorway. She was holding a basket of laundry, but her eyes zeroed in on the papers in my hand instantly. She saw the blue border. She saw the legal density of the text. Her face changed. It was a transformation I had seen 1,000 times in micro-expressions, but never this openly. The sweet suburban mother vanished. In her place was a desperate, angry woman who realized she was about to be exposed. "What is that?" she demanded, her voice dropping an octave. I tried to slide the papers back into the envelope. "It is private. Valerie, get out." "That is legal paperwork," she said, dropping the laundry basket. It hit the floor with a thud. She stepped into the room. "Is that about the accounts? Did that old witch leave more lies behind?" "Don't you call her that," I said. Standing up, I tried to put the letter behind my back. "This has nothing to do with you." "It has everything to do with me," Valerie screamed. She lunged forward. "I ran this house for 10 years. I took care of her while you were off playing genius in the city. I am not letting you and your father steal from me." She was fast. Before I could step aside, she grabbed my wrist. Her fingernails dug into my skin. "Give it to me," she hissed. "No!" I shouted, yanking my arm back. "Let go!" This was not a scolding. This was a physical assault. We were two adults struggling in a small, sunlit bedroom. I was taller than her, but she was fueled by a decade of suppressed rage and greed. She clawed at the papers, ripping the envelope. "You greedy little brat," she yelled. "You think you are better than us? You think you can just take everything?" "It is the truth," I yelled back. "She knew what you did with the money." That was the wrong thing to say. Valerie's eyes went wild. She let go of my wrist and swung her arm. Her open palm connected with the side of my face with a sickening crack. The force of the slap was shocking. It wasn't just a sting. It was a blow that rattled my teeth. My head snapped to the right, and I stumbled backward. I lost my footing on the rug. I fell back, crashing into the antique oak wardrobe. My elbow slammed against the wood, sending a jolt of blinding pain up my arm that made me gasp. I slid down to the floor, clutching my arm, the papers still crunched in my other hand. The room was suddenly silent, save for my ragged breathing. Valerie stood over me, her chest heaving. She looked at her hand, then at me. For a second, I thought she might apologize. Then I heard the front door slam downstairs. "Martin!" Valerie screamed. Her voice shifted instantly from aggressor to victim. It was terrifyingly seamless. "Martin, help! She's crazy!" She grabbed her own arm, rubbing it as if she were the one who had been hit. I tried to stand up, but the room spun. My cheek was throbbing, hot and tight. I looked down at the papers. The top page was torn diagonally, a jagged rip running through Grandma's handwriting. Dad appeared in the doorway a few seconds later. He was wearing his work boots, breathing hard from running up the stairs. He looked from Valerie, who was shrinking against the doorframe pretending to cry, to me, sitting on the floor with a red mark blooming on my face. "What the hell is going on?" Dad shouted. "She attacked me," Valerie sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I came in to bring laundry, and she was snooping through your mother's financial papers. And when I asked her what she was doing, she lunged at me. She tried to hit me. Martin, I had to push her away." It was such a blatant, inverted lie that I couldn't even speak at first. I just stared at her. "Dad," I croaked, holding up the torn letter. "Dad, she hit me. She came in and tried to take Grandma's letter." Dad looked at me. He looked at the red mark on my cheek. It was a handprint. It was clearly a handprint. He looked at Valerie, who was performing a masterpiece of fragility. He had a choice. In that split second, the universe held its breath. He could look at the evidence, his daughter on the floor, the letters she had a legal right to, or he could accept the story that kept his life simple. He rubbed his face with his calloused hands, groaning. "Lena," he said, and the tone of his voice broke something inside me that the slap hadn't touched. "Why? Why do you always have to make everything so complicated?" I stared at him. "Complicated? She just assaulted me." "She said it was an accident," Dad said, refusing to meet my eyes. He looked at the floor. "You are upsetting her. You are upsetting the whole house. It is just paper. Lena, for God's sake, it is just paper. Do not be so dramatic." He walked over to Valerie and put his arm around her. "Come on, Val. Let us go downstairs. I will get you some water." He turned his back on me. He left me on the floor of his dead mother's room, nursing a bruised elbow and a burning face, while he comforted the woman who had done it. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not ask to see the letter. He chose his peace. I sat there for a long time after they left. The pain in my arm settled into a dull, throbbing ache. The pain in my chest was sharper. I slowly gathered the papers. I checked the pages. The protective provision page, the one that detailed the consequences of physical interference, was intact. I stood up. I did not pack the rest of Grandma's things. I did not say goodbye. I walked out of the room, down the stairs, and past the kitchen where I could hear Valerie's low, murmuring voice and Dad's soothing tones. I walked out the front door. It had started to rain. A cold, miserable drizzle that soaked through my shirt instantly. I walked to my car, threw the torn letter onto the passenger seat, and gripped the steering wheel. My face burned. My heart felt like a stone. But as I started the engine and backed out of the driveway, leaving 42 Maple Lane behind me, a cold realization washed over the heat of my anger. Valerie thought she had won. Dad thought he had diffused the situation. They had no idea what they had just done. Grandma had said, "If anyone uses physical force to prevent you from reading my final instructions, the trust immediately locks them out." Valerie hadn't just slapped me. She had just slapped herself out of the will. She had just slapped my father out of his stipend. With one loss of control, she had triggered the trap that Grandma and Addison Pierce had spent months building. I touched my cheek. It hurt. But as I drove away into the rain, I didn't cry. I started planning. I was going to let the bruise turn purple. I was going to let the swelling rise. And then, I was going to take a picture, because unlike my father, the Eleanor Legacy Trust did not care about keeping the peace. It only cared about the truth. I drove until the rain turned into a relentless pounding sheet against the windshield, blurring the familiar roads of Ridgefield into a gray smear. I did not have a destination in mind, just a frantic need to put miles between myself and the house on Maple Lane. I ended up at the Starlight Motel, a dilapidated single-story strip on the edge of the highway, the kind of place where the neon sign buzzed with the sound of a dying insect and the front desk clerk did not ask for ID if you paid in cash. I paid for one night with a crumpled 20 and a 10. Shaking the rain from my hair, the room smelled of lemon polish and stale cigarettes, a scent that somehow felt safer than the lavender and rage I had just left behind. I locked the door, I threw the deadbolt, then I dragged the only chair in the room over and wedged it under the doorknob. It was an irrational act. Valerie and Dad were not going to chase me here, but my body was still vibrating with the shock of the assault. My elbow throbbed with a dull, sickening rhythm where it had hit the wardrobe, and my cheek felt hot and tight. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress and dumped the contents of the envelope onto the cheap floral bedspread. The letter was a casualty of war. The thick cream-colored paper was crinkled where Valerie had grabbed it, and the first 2 pages were torn almost in half, the jagged rip running like a scar through Grandma's handwriting. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely align the edges. I had to use the motel's holy Bible to flatten the pages out, piecing together the fragments of the only voice I had left. I took a breath that shuddered in my chest, and I began to read. My dearest Lena, if you are reading this, then the silence of the house has finally become too much, or I have finally gone to join your grandfather. I hope it is the latter. I hope I am gone, because I do not think I could bear to watch you read what I have to say next. I remember the first time I held you. You were so small, barely 6 pounds, but you had a grip like a vice. You grabbed my pinky finger and would not let go. I told your mother right then, this one is a fighter. We lost your mother too soon. Lena, and I watched as you were slowly pushed to the edge of your own life. I saw the way Martin stopped looking at you because seeing you hurt too much. I saw how he let a new family grow over the old one, like ivy choking a tree. I should have stopped it sooner. That is my greatest sin. I thought keeping the peace would save you. I was wrong. I wiped a tear that had dripped onto my hand, even from the grave. She was apologizing for things that were not her fault. But love is not enough to keep a roof over your head. Lena, you need truth, and the truth is ugly. Over the last 5 years, I have been watching. You know I never trusted computers, but I learned to read the bank statements that Martin left on the counter. I saw the patterns. There were withdrawals from the joint savings account, the one meant for house repairs and emergencies, that coincided perfectly with Valerie's spa weekends or Kyle's sudden need for new equipment. There were checks written to cash for groceries that amounted to $500 a week. We have never eaten $500 worth of food in a week. Lena, not even at Christmas. I traced the line with my finger. She had seen it. She had tracked it. Your father is a good man, but he is a blind one. He signs whatever she puts in front of him. He thinks he is providing for his family, but he is being hollowed out. 2 years ago, I found a document in the trash. It was a second mortgage application on the house. Martin's signature was on it, but the date was a day he was fishing with his buddies upstate. I do not think he knows the house. My house, the house your mother grew up in, is leveraged up to the chimney. My stomach dropped. A second mortgage. Valerie had not just been spending cash. She had been selling the equity of the home right out from under my father's feet. I could not confront him. He would have denied it. He would have asked her, and she would have spun a story, and I would have been the crazy old woman causing trouble. So, I did the only thing I could. I changed the game. The trust I have created, the Eleanor Legacy Trust, is not just a gift, it is a vault. By transferring the deed of the house and the bulk of the remaining assets into this trust, I have locked it down. The trust pays the bills directly. It pays the taxes. It gives Martin a small stipend for living expenses, enough for utilities and food, but not a penny more. Valerie cannot touch the principal. She cannot borrow against the house. She cannot sell the land. I flipped to the next page, carefully aligning the torn edges. This was the section where the handwriting became firmer, the ink pressing deeper into the paper. But I know Valerie. I know that when a predator is cornered, they bite. She will try to stop this. She will try to manipulate Martin into challenging the will. She might even try to bully you into signing your rights away. And that brings me to the most important part. I sat with Mr. Pierce for 3 days drafting this next clause. He called it extreme. I called it insurance. It is the non-aggression and anti-coercion provision. It states, in plain legal terms, that if any heir or family member uses physical violence, intimidation, threat of harm, or deceit to prevent the beneficiary, that is you, Lena, from accessing this letter or the assets of the trust, they are to be immediately and permanently disinherited. I stopped breathing. The air in the motel room felt suddenly charged, electric. I want to be clear. Lena, if they scream at you, the trust stands. If they insult you, the trust stands. But if they touch you, if they put a hand on you in anger because you tried to claim what is yours, then they lose everything. Not just the house. They lose the stipend. They lose the right to live on the property. They are out. I looked at the words, if they touch you. I am writing this because I have a terrible feeling that you might be reading this with an ice pack on your arm or a bruise on your face. I pray I am wrong. I pray that they let you read this in peace. But if I am right, if you are sitting somewhere safe, hurting because someone in that house decided their greed was more important than your safety, then I need you to listen to me. Raise your head, Lena. Do not cry for the pain. That pain is the key. That mark on your skin is not a badge of shame. It is a signature. It is the proof Mr. Pierce needs. If they hit you, they did not break you. They just signed the final page of my will for me. I let out a sob that sounded more like a laugh. It was a raw, guttural sound. I looked at my reflection in the dusty mirror above the dresser. The red mark on my cheek was deepening, turning a mottled purple at the edges. My elbow was swollen, throbbing in time with my heartbeat. I had driven here thinking I was a victim. I had run away thinking I had lost the fight. But Grandma Eleanor had reached through time, from beyond the grave, and told me that I hadn't lost. Valerie had walked right into a trap that had been set years ago. Do not fight back with fists. The letter concluded. Fight back with evidence. Take pictures. Save dates. Write it down. And then, go to Addison Pierce. He has the second copy. He has the video. He is waiting for you. You are not alone. My sweet girl. You never were. Love. Grandma. I sat there for a long time, just holding the paper. The rain lashed against the window, but I didn't feel cold anymore. I felt a strange, cold clarity. It was the feeling of the data aligning. It was the feeling of a complex equation finally resolving into a simple integer. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, startling me. I picked it up. It was a number I didn't have saved, but I recognized the area code. Hello? My voice was raspy. Lena? The voice was deep, calm, and familiar. This is Addison Pierce. I sat up straighter. Mr. Pierce? I am sorry to call you so late, he said, but I just got an alert from the bank, a flagship alert. What kind of alert? An attempt was made 45 minutes ago to access the primary savings account of the estate via online banking. Addison said, 3 incorrect password attempts, followed by a request for a wire transfer using an old authorization code that I revoked the morning Eleanor passed. Valerie. She hadn't wasted a second. After Dad had taken her downstairs to calm her down, she must have gone straight to the computer. She knew the letter contained the bad news. She was trying to drain the accounts before the trust could lock her out. Did it go through? I asked. No, Addison said, and I could practically hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. The trust is active, Lena. The accounts are frozen to everyone but you and me. But this aggression is concerning. It shows desperation. Mr. Pierce, I said, looking at the bruise in the mirror, it is not just financial aggression. There was a pause on the line. What do you mean? I went to the house today to get the letter from the tin box. I took a steadying breath. Valerie came in. She tried to take it. She hit me. The silence on the other end was heavy. Then, Addison spoke, his voice devoid of any lawyerly detachment. Are you safe? I am at a motel, the Starlight. Are you injured? She slapped me, hard, and she shoved me into the wardrobe. My elbow is swollen, and my face is bruised. Lena, Addison said, and the intensity in his tone matched Grandma's letter perfectly. Listen to me. I need you to document that, right now. Take photos, high resolution, every angle. If you have the torn letter, take a picture of that too. I have it, I said. Okay, good. This changes everything. We are not just talking about a probate dispute anymore. We are talking about the activation of the protective provision. We are talking about immediate removal. I know, I said. I just read the clause. I need you to come to my office in Brookdale, he said. Not the satellite office in Ridgefield. Come to the main one in the city. It is safer. Can you get there tomorrow morning? I can get there tonight, I said. I am not staying in this town a minute longer than I have to. Good. I will be there. I will wait for you. I hung up the phone. The trembling in my hands had stopped. I switched on the harsh overhead light of the motel room. I took out my phone. I turned the camera on myself. I did not use a filter. I did not try to look pretty. I angled my face so the light caught the ugly purple bloom on my cheekbone. I snapped the photo. Click. I rolled up my sleeve. The skin around my elbow was angry and red, swelling rapidly. Click. I laid the torn letter on the bedspread, framing the rip that Valerie's violence had caused, making sure the text about physical force was visible next to the tear. Click. I uploaded them all to a secure cloud server. Then I emailed them to Addison. Then I emailed them to my own encrypted work account. I packed my bag. I put the torn letter back into the envelope, treating it with the reverence of a holy relic. I put on my coat. I walked out of the motel room into the rain. The air was freezing, but it felt clean. I wasn't fleeing anymore. I was advancing. I wasn't the victim leaving town with her tail between her legs. I was the evidence leaving the crime scene. I caught the last bus out of Ridgefield at 11 o'clock. As the bus rumbled past the sign welcoming people to Our Happy Town, I touched the sore spot on my face. If they hit you, they signed the final page. Valerie had wanted to hurt me. She had wanted to put me in my place. She didn't realize that by raising her hand, she had handed me the keys to the kingdom. She had thought she was fighting a frightened stepdaughter. She forgot she was fighting Eleanor Vance. And Grandma Eleanor never lost a war. Addison Pierce's office in Brookdale was a sanctuary of mahogany and silence, a stark contrast to the fluorescent grit of the Starlight Motel. It was the kind of room that smelled of leather-bound books and expensive decisions. I sat in a wingback chair, my hands resting on my knees, while Addison placed a clean, unblemished copy of Grandma's letter on the desk in front of me. Next to it, he set a tablet. "Watch," he said simply. He pressed play. On the screen, Grandma Eleanor appeared. She was sitting up in her hospital bed, the same day we had filmed it. The video was crisp, the audio clear. There was no shaking, no interruption, and most importantly, no tearing sound of paper being ripped by greedy hands. "If a day comes when someone hits you just because you dared to read what belongs to you," Grandma's voice said from the screen, looking straight at me, "I want you to remember something. I did not leave you defenseless." I touched the bruise on my cheek. It was blooming into a spectacular shade of violet, hot to the touch. "You have done exactly what she asked, Lena," Addison said, leaning back in his chair. "The photos you sent me? They are damning. Valerie's slap didn't just hurt you, it activated the triggering clause of the trust. Legally speaking, she assaulted a beneficiary to obstruct the execution of the will. That is grounds for immediate removal." "So we sue her now?" I asked, my voice sounding stronger than it had in days. "We kick her out?" Addison shook his head slowly, a tactical glint in his eyes. "Not yet. If we file a motion today, she will play the victim. She will say it was a family squabble, that you provoked her, that she was defending herself. She will drag your father into court to testify against you. It will be messy." He tapped the file on his desk. "We need to build a wall so high she can't climb over it. We need the financials. We need the neighbors. We need to make the truth so heavy that when we finally drop it, nobody can lift it off her." "Patience," I whispered. It was Grandma's favorite word. "Patience," Addison agreed. "Go back to school. Finish your degree. Build your life. Let me do the digging. When you come back, you won't be coming back to fight. You will be coming back to collect." So, I went back. I returned to Ashford University with a cold, quiet fire burning in my chest. The fear that had defined my childhood was gone, replaced by a singular focus. I stopped trying to be liked. I started trying to be formidable. I threw myself into my work at Rootwave Labs. I wasn't just an intern anymore. I was a machine. I devoured data sets on shipping routes and fuel consumption rates until my eyes burned. I graduated at the top of my class, not because I was the smartest person in the room, but because I was the only one who knew that failure meant going back to a house where I wasn't wanted. After graduation, while my classmates were taking gap years to backpack through Europe, I took a risk. Two of the senior developers at Rootwave, Marcus and a quiet genius named Sarah, were frustrated with the company's direction. We sat down in a diner one night at 3 a.m, sketching on napkins. "We can do this better," I told them. "Companies are bleeding money in the last mile of delivery because they are using intuition instead of data. We can sell them the eyes to see the problem." That night, Northline Insight was born. We started in a shared workspace that was basically a closet with Wi-Fi. We ate cheap pizza and worked 18-hour days. I lived on caffeine and the memory of Valerie's hand striking my face. Every time I felt tired, every time I wanted to quit. I just looked at the photo of my bruise that I kept in a hidden folder on my laptop. It was the best fuel in the world. Our break came 6 months in. I wrote an article titled, "The Hidden Cost of the Left Turn," analyzing how delivery routes that favored right turns saved millions in fuel and time. It went viral on LinkedIn. Suddenly, people weren't asking, "Who is Northline?" They were asking, "Can Northline fix our fleet?" We signed a contract with a regional supermarket chain worth $200,000. Then we signed a logistics partner for $500,000. Within 3 years, Northline Insight was evaluating supply chains for companies across the tri-state area. I bought a condo in Harbor City. It had floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the harbor. I bought furniture that I chose, not leftovers. I filled the fridge with food I liked, and every month, I put a significant chunk of my income into a separate investment account. Meanwhile, the silence from Ridgefield was deafening. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving. I didn't go home for Christmas. I sent generic cards, signed Love Lena, just to keep the bridge from completely collapsing, but I never crossed it. Valerie would send the occasional text message, usually passive-aggressive. "Hope you are well. Dad misses you. Shame you are too busy with your computer games to visit." I heard from Mrs. Gable, an old neighbor of Grandma's who I kept in touch with, that Valerie was telling people around town that I was struggling in the city. "She tells the church group you are doing some kind of data entry," Mrs. Gable told me over the phone. "She says it is a shame you didn't take that secretary job at the community college. She says you are barely making ends meet." I laughed. I was wearing a silk blouse that cost more than Valerie's entire weekly grocery budget, looking out at a city where I employed 15 people. "Let her talk. Mrs. Gable. Let her think I'm nothing. It was better this way. Let them think I was weak. Let them think I was barely surviving. It would make the end much sweeter." But I wasn't just hoarding money. I was preparing the stage. About 4 years after Grandma died, I saw a listing online. The old Rialto Theater in Ridgefield was up for sale. It was a crumbling brick building on the outskirts of town, about a mile from Grandma's house. I used to go there as a kid to watch dollar movies before the roof started leaking and the birds moved in. It had been abandoned for a decade. I didn't buy it under my own name. I created a shell company called Elm Street Holdings. I paid cash, $75,000, for a real estate developer. It was nothing. For me, it was the purchase of a battlefield. I hired a contractor from 3 towns over, making him sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. "I want it restored," I told him. "Not modern. I want it to look like it did in 1995. Fix the roof, fix the seats, but keep the soul." "What are you going to show here?" he asked, looking at the water-damaged screen. "Movies?" "Just one movie," I said. "One time." While the theater was being rebuilt, Addison was finalizing his masterpiece. I drove to Brookdale to meet him one rainy Tuesday. He looked older, but his smile was sharper than ever. He laid a binder on the desk that was 3 inches thick. "We have it all, Lena," he said. He opened the binder. It was a forensic autopsy of my father's financial life. "Here," Addison pointed to a column of numbers. 10 years ago, a check for $5,000 from your grandmother's care fund. Valerie noted it as medical equipment upgrade. I cross-referenced it. There was no equipment purchased, but there was a booking at a luxury spa in Vermont for the same week. He flipped the page. Here, $3,000 for home repairs. No contractor in town has a record of working on your house that month, but Kyle's credit card debt, which was exactly $2,950, was paid off in full the next day. It went on and on. Trips, clothes, dinners, thousands upon thousands of dollars siphoned out of accounts that were meant to keep an old woman alive and a family afloat. She had been bleeding them dry while telling the world she was the one holding the tourniquet. "And the mortgage?" I asked. "It is worse than we thought," Addison said grimly. "She took out a second mortgage, and she is behind on the payments. If the trust hadn't stepped in to freeze the assets and cover the taxes, the bank would have started foreclosure proceedings on the main house 6 months ago. Martin doesn't know. She intercepts the mail." I felt a cold rage tighten my throat. She was going to lose the house my mother grew up in. She was going to leave my father homeless in his 60s. "We can nail her," Addison said. "We have the assault. We have the embezzlement. We have the fraud. I can walk into a courtroom tomorrow and strip her of everything. She will be lucky if she doesn't go to jail." I looked at the binder. It was undeniable. It was the nuclear option. "Not yet," I said. "Lena," Addison sighed. "What are you waiting for?" "I am waiting for the theater," I said. That weekend, I drove down to check on the Rialto. The renovations were nearly done. The smell of fresh paint and popcorn oil filled the lobby. It felt like a church. I walked into the main auditorium, sitting in the center seat of the front row. I had my backpack with me. I had brought the tin box, the Danish cookie tin, to keep it safe in the city. I opened it, sifting through the old letters, looking for strength. And then I found it. It was a letter I had missed before. It was stuck to the bottom of the tin, folded so small it looked like a receipt. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Martin. The date on it was from 2 years before Grandma died. I unfolded it. The paper was thin, almost translucent. "My dear Martin, I am writing this because I am a coward. I cannot say this to your face because I know you will look away, and if you look away, I will break. But I need you to know. I see you. I see how tired you are. I know you think that by letting Valerie rule the house, you are buying peace. But peace at the cost of your daughter is not peace. Martin, it is surrender. Do you remember when Lena was born? You held her and said you would kill dragons for her. You don't need to kill dragons, son. You just need to open the door for her. She is waiting for you. She thinks you don't love her. I tell her you do. But my words are not enough. Please, Martin, before I die, let me see you be her father again. She is so much like her mother. If you look at her, really look at her, you will see the best parts of the woman we both lost. Please, don't let me leave this world knowing my granddaughter is an orphan in a house with 2 parents. Love, Ma." I sat in the empty theater, reading the letter over and over. My hands shook. She had never given it to him. Maybe she was afraid. Maybe she thought it wouldn't make a difference. I had spent the last 4 years building a weapon to destroy Valerie. I had built a lawsuit that would ruin her. But holding this letter, I realized that destroying Valerie wasn't enough. If I just sued them, Dad would be a victim. He would be the collateral damage of a war between his wife and his daughter. He would never have to take responsibility. He would just be the man who lost his house because the women in his life couldn't get along. That wasn't what Grandma wanted. She wanted him to wake up. I looked up at the blank white screen of the theater. If I sued now, Dad would hate me. He would see me as the aggressor. He would defend Valerie because he was programmed to defend her. I had to break the programming. I took out my phone and called Addison. "Change of plans," I said. "Lena, we are ready to file," Addison warned. "No filing," I said firmly. "Not yet. I want you to set up a meeting, but not a legal meeting. I want you to send an invitation." "An invitation to what?" "A memorial," I said. "Tell them that I have organized a private memorial for Eleanor Vance. Tell them it is at the old Rialto Theater next Saturday. Tell them it is time to put the past to rest. And the binder? Addison asked. The evidence? Bring it, I said. Bring the video. Bring the original letter. Bring everything. We aren't going to a courtroom. Addison, we are going to the movies. You want to ambush them, he said, realizing my plan. I don't want to ambush them, I corrected him. I want to give my father a choice. I am going to show him the truth. I am going to show him exactly who he has been sleeping next to for 15 years. And then, I am going to hand him this letter. And if he still chooses her? Addison asked softly. I closed the tin box. The sound echoed in the empty auditorium. Then I destroy them both, I said. But he gets to see the movie first. I treated the memorial service not as a granddaughter grieving, but as a CEO launching a product. The product was the truth, and the target audience was a single man who had spent the last 15 years looking the other way. I started with the digital offensive. I created a group chat including every aunt, uncle, cousin, and neighbor who had ever eaten a slice of Grandma's apple pie. I kept the message short, professional, and devoid of drama. Please join us this Saturday at 7 in the evening at the Rialto Theater. We are hosting A Night to Remember Eleanor. No gifts, no flowers, just stories and a few things she wanted to share with us before she passed. I did not mention the will. I did not mention the trust. I did not mention that the things she wanted to share included a video testimony that would likely tear the family apart. I let them think it was a slideshow of her gardening. Then came the hard part. I had to call my father. I sat in my car outside the theater, staring at his number on my screen. My thumb hovered over the call button for a long time. I knew exactly how this conversation would go. He would be elusive. He would be tired. He would filter everything through the lens of, how will Valerie react? I pressed the button. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice heavy with the specific exhaustion of a man who lives in a house with too much tension. Hello, Lena? Hi, Dad, I said, keeping my voice steady. Did you get the invite? For Saturday? There was a pause. I could hear the television in the background, likely a game show Valerie watched. I saw it. A memorial? At the old movie theater? I thought that place was condemned. It is not condemned anymore, I said. I fixed it up. For Grandma. That must have cost a fortune, Lee, he said, and I heard the familiar worry about money creeping in. We already did the funeral. The church service was nice. Valerie organized it beautifully. Do we really need another event? The church service was for Valerie, I said, cutting him off gently but firmly. This is for Grandma. And Dad, I need you to be there. I am not asking for money. I'm not asking for you to speak. I just want you to sit down and see something Grandma prepared. It is not about the inheritance. It is about the truth. The truth, he repeated, the words sounding foreign in his mouth. You know Valerie isn't going to like this. She thinks you are just trying to stir the pot. I don't care what Valerie likes, I said. I care about what Grandma wanted. She left something for you, Dad, something she couldn't give you while she was alive because she was afraid of causing a fight. Are you really going to let her down twice? It was a low blow. I knew it, but I needed to land it. I will check the calendar, he muttered. I will try to make it. I will try. 7 o'clock, I said. Don't try. Just come. I hung up. I will try was his code for I will ask permission, but it was the best I was going to get. Valerie, predictably, did not receive a phone call. She got a formal paper invitation, mailed to the house on creamy cardstock. I heard through Mrs. Gable that she had opened it at the mailbox and scoffed loud enough for the neighbors to hear. A movie premiere, she had apparently laughed. The girl thinks she is Spielberg now. My mother-in-law has been dead for years. What is there to remember? It is just a cry for attention. But Mrs. Gable also told me that Valerie immediately went into town to buy a new dress. That was the thing about Valerie. She could not stand the idea of a room full of people talking about the family without her there to control the narrative. She would come, not to honor Eleanor, but to supervise me. The week leading up to Saturday was a blur of logistics. I hired a small team of event planners from the city, but I gave them very specific instructions. I did not want this to look like a corporate gala. I wanted it to feel like Grandma's living room, expanded to fit 200 seats. We scrubbed the theater until the smell of mildew was replaced by lemon oil and beeswax. I had photos of Grandma blown up to poster size, black and white shots of her in the 40s, color photos of her holding me as a baby, pictures of her in the garden with dirt on her knees. We hung them along the walls of the lobby, creating a gallery of a life well lived. I set up a long table in the lobby, covered in her favorite lace tablecloths, the ones I had rescued from the house before Valerie could throw them out. And on that table, I placed platters of cookies, not store-bought. I had spent 2 nights in my kitchen baking hundreds of oatmeal raisin cookies, using her exact recipe. The smell of cinnamon and brown sugar hit you the moment you walked through the double doors. It was a sensory trap. I wanted everyone who walked in to smell that and remember her kindness instantly. Then there was the seating chart. I approached the auditorium layout like a battlefield commander. In Valerie's world, there was always a hierarchy: the head table, the VIP section, the kids' table. I stripped all of that away. Every seat was identical. Every row was equal. But I did reserve 3 specific seats. In the exact center of the theater, the sweet spot for audio and visual, I placed 2 small cards on the velvet armrests: Martin Carrington, Valerie Carrington. Directly behind them, in the row that would look over their shoulders, was a single seat reserved for Addison Pierce. He wasn't just a guest, he was the witness. I wanted him there so that when the legal hammer dropped, he would be looming in their peripheral vision like the ghost of Christmas future. "You are setting a stage," Addison told me when he came by to inspect the setup on Friday afternoon. He was looking at the massive screen where I was testing the projector. "I am giving them a chance," I said, adjusting the focus on a slide that showed a scanned image of one of Grandma's handwritten letters. If I just sued them, Addison, Valerie would spin it. She would tell Dad I am a greedy, vindictive daughter who wants to steal his home. She would play the victim, and he would believe her because it is easier than believing he married a con artist. "And this?" Addison gestured to the empty theater. "What does this do?" "This removes the spin," I said. "I am going to put Grandma's voice in this room. I am going to let her explain the theft. I am going to let her explain the abuse, and Dad is going to have to sit there, surrounded by his neighbors and his family, and decide if he is going to call his dead mother a liar." Addison nodded slowly. "It is high risk, Lena. If the tech fails, if the video freezes, the moment collapses." "The tech won't fail," I said. "I built my career on systems that don't fail." On the morning of the event, I was at the Rialto by 6. I checked every light bulb. I checked the sound system 3 times. I had a backup laptop, a backup projector bulb, and a backup generator. I stood on the small stage in front of the massive screen. The theater was dark, save for the ghost light on the stage. I held the microphone in my hand. It was heavy. This was it. I had spent years running away from Ridgefield. I had spent years building a fortress of money and success in Harbor City so that I would never have to feel small again. But standing there in the empty theater, I realized that all that success didn't matter if I couldn't fix the wound at the center of my life. I wasn't doing this for the house. I didn't need the house. I could buy 10 houses. I was doing this for the little girl who sat on the stairs while her father looked the other way. I was doing this to force him to look. By 6:30, the guests started arriving. It was raining again, a soft, steady drizzle that made the warm, golden light of the theater lobby feel even more inviting. I stood by the door, greeting people. Cousins I hadn't seen in 5 years hugged me, looking at my designer suit and my straightened hair with confusion. They expected the struggling Lena that Valerie had told them about. Instead, they got a woman who looked like she owned the building, because I did. "Lena, you look expensive," my Aunt Sarah said, eyeing my shoes. "I have been working hard, Aunt Sarah." I smiled. "Grab a cookie. They are Grandma's recipe." At 6:50, the double doors swung open, and the air in the lobby changed. Dad walked in first. He looked older than I remembered. His shoulders were slumped inside his raincoat. his hair thinner and grayer. He looked like a man who was shrinking. Behind him came Valerie. She was wearing a royal blue dress that was too bright for the occasion and too tight for comfort. She had her arm linked through Dad's, not in a gesture of affection, but of possession. She was steering him. She stopped in the middle of the lobby, her eyes scanning the room. She took in the fresh paint, the plush new carpets, the gallery of photos on the wall. She looked at the crowd of people eating cookies and drinking tea. For a second, she looked impressed. Then, the jealousy kicked in. She marched over to me, dragging Dad along like a piece of luggage. "Well," she said, her voice pitched loud enough to be heard by the people nearby, "this is certainly elaborate. I didn't know the old theater was even functional. Who is paying for all this? Did you find a sponsor? Lena? Or did you dip into that little savings account your grandmother left you?" She was trying to embarrass me. She was implying that I was wasting my inheritance on a party. Dad looked around, blinking. "It is nice, Lee, really nice, but Val is right. This must have cost thousands. You shouldn't have spent your safety net on this." I looked at them. I looked at Valerie, with her fake concern and her real malice. I looked at Dad, with his genuine worry and his complete ignorance. I smiled. It was the smile of someone who was holding a royal flush, while the other player was betting their car keys on a pair of twos. "I didn't use the savings account. Valerie," I said, my voice calm and carrying easily over the murmur of the crowd. "And I don't have a sponsor." "Then who paid for the rental? Who paid for the catering?" she demanded, looking for a crack in the facade. "There is no rental fee," I said. "I bought the building." Valerie stopped, her mouth opened slightly, then closed. "You... what?" "I bought the theater," I repeated, "through my holding company, and the renovation was paid for by the profits from my firm's last quarter." I stepped closer to her, lowering my voice just enough so that it felt intimate, dangerous. "You see, Valerie, the useless thing I do on computers, it turns out people pay a lot of money for the truth. Northline Insight is doing very well." I turned to Dad. "Go take your seats. Middle row. I marked them for you. You are going to want to be comfortable for this." I watched them walk away. Valerie was stiff, her heels clicking angrily on the floor. She was rattled. She had walked in expecting to patronize a poor relation, and instead, she had walked into the territory of a peer. Dad just looked confused. He kept looking back at me, then at the walls, then at the ceiling. He was trying to reconcile the daughter he ignored with the woman who just bought a landmark. I checked my watch. 7 o'clock. I signaled Addison, who was standing by the concession stand looking like a CIA agent in a trench coat. He nodded and moved toward the auditorium. I walked into the tech booth at the back of the theater. I put on my headset. "Kill the house lights," I told my tech guy. "Fade the music. Let us start the show." The lobby emptied into the auditorium. 200 people found their seats. The lights dimmed to black. The murmur of conversation died down. I stood in the darkness of the booth, looking down at the two heads in the center row. "Okay, Grandma," I whispered. "You have the floor." The lights in the auditorium dimmed until the room was submerged in a heavy, expectant darkness. The only illumination came from the ghost light on the stage, casting long, sharp shadows against the velvet curtains. I walked up the 3 steps to the small podium I had set up. My heels clicked against the wood. A lonely sound in the vast silence. I held the microphone in one hand. In the other, I held the laminated letter, the one Valerie had torn, now pieced back together and sealed in plastic like a crime scene evidence bag. My hand was shaking. I told myself it was the cold air of the theater, but I knew better. This was the moment I had been rehearsing for 3 years. "Good evening," I said. My voice boomed through the speakers, slightly too loud. Before the tech guy adjusted the levels, I saw my father flinch in the center row. Valerie was sitting rigid next to him, her arms crossed, her face set in a mask of bored disdain. "Tonight is not about money," I began, looking out at the sea of faces, aunts, uncles, People who had watched me grow up and done nothing when I was pushed aside. And tonight is not about property. Tonight is about letting my grandmother say the things she did not get to say while she was alive. She wanted to say them to me. She wanted to say them to my father, and she wanted to say them to all of you. I lifted the laminated letter. It caught the light. "This is the last letter Eleanor Vance ever wrote," I said. "She wrote it in a hospital room while her heart was failing. I am going to read the beginning." I looked down at the text. I didn't need to read it. I had memorized every comma. "My dearest Lena," I read, keeping my voice steady, "if you are reading this, then the silence of the house has finally become too much. I remember the first time I held you. You were so small, but you had a grip like a vice. I told your mother right then. This one is a fighter. We lost your mother too soon. And I watched as you were slowly pushed to the edge of your own life. I saw the way Martin stopped looking at you because seeing you hurt too much." I paused. I looked directly at my father. He was staring at the floor, his hands gripping his knees. "I saw how he let a new family grow over the old one," I continued reading. "Like ivy choking a tree. I should have stopped it sooner. That is my greatest sin." The room was dead silent. You could hear the hum of the ventilation system. "But love is not enough." I read on, my voice hardening. "You need truth, and the truth is ugly. Over the last 5 years, I have been watching. I saw the patterns. There were withdrawals from the joint savings account that coincided perfectly with Valerie's vacations. There were checks written to cash for groceries that amounted to $500 a week. I heard a sharp intake of breath from the row behind Dad. That was Aunt Sarah. "Enough." Valerie stood up. The movement was violent, jarring. She pointed a manicured finger at me. "This is ridiculous. I am not going to sit here and listen to the ramblings of a sick old woman. She was on medication. She didn't know what she was saying." She turned to the crowd, her voice shrill. "Eleanor was confused at the end. Everyone knows that. This is just Lena trying to humiliate us with lies." I did not shout back. I did not argue. I just looked toward the back of the room and nodded once. "Mr. Pierce?" I said into the mic. Addison Pierce stood up from the seat directly behind Valerie. He looked like a judgment delivered in a 3-piece suit. "I am Addison Pierce," he announced, his voice projecting easily without a microphone. "I was the personal attorney for Eleanor Vance for 20 years. I am here to verify that the document Lena is reading is the legal last will and testament of Mrs. Vance, drafted while she was of sound mind and body." Valerie spun around to face him. "You? You can't prove that." "Actually, Mrs. Carrington," Addison said calmly, "we can—" He pointed to the screen. I stepped aside. The massive movie screen behind me flickered to life. The video was grainy at first. Then it snapped into sharp focus. It was the hospital room. The beeping of the heart monitor provided a rhythmic, sterile soundtrack. Grandma Eleanor was sitting up in bed, looking frail but fierce. A collective gasp went through the room. It was like seeing a ghost. On the screen, Grandma held the letter, the pristine, untorn version. She looked into the camera lens, which meant she was looking directly at Valerie. "Over the last 5 years," Grandma's voice filled the theater, amplified by the surround sound. "I have been watching. I saw the patterns." She read the exact words I had just spoken. She listed the amounts. She listed the dates. She talked about the second mortgage. Valerie sank back into her seat. She looked small. She looked trapped. Then came the twist. On screen, Grandma lowered the paper. She leaned forward. The camera zoomed in slightly. "I have created the Eleanor Legacy Trust," Grandma said. "But there is a condition, a strict one. I know the temper in this house. I know what happens when Valerie gets cornered." I saw Dad lift his head. He was looking at the screen, mesmerized. "If a day comes," Grandma said, her voice trembling with intensity, "when someone hits you, Lena, or threatens you, just because you dared to read what belongs to you, then I want you to remember something. That blow is their signature. If anyone uses physical force to prevent the reading of this will," Grandma continued, reciting the legal clause from memory. They are to be immediately stripped of all rights to the estate, no stipend, no housing, nothing. The silence in the theater was now heavy, suffocating. It was the silence of 100 people realizing they were witnessing an execution. I stepped back to the microphone. The video paused on Grandma's face. 3 years ago, I said, looking at Dad. I came home to read this letter. I went into Grandma's room. I opened the envelope. I touched the scar on my chin. It was faint now, covered by makeup, but I knew exactly where it was. I didn't finish reading it that day, I said softly, because someone came into the room. Someone tried to take it from me, and when I refused, she hit me. Valerie jumped up again. "That is a lie," she screamed. Her composure was gone. She was wild-eyed. "She is lying. Martin, she slipped. She fell. I tried to catch her." "She hit me," I repeated, my voice cutting through her panic. "She slapped me across the face and shoved me into the wardrobe. That is how I got this scar. That is why I left town. Not because I was ungrateful, but because I was bleeding." "Martin!" Valerie grabbed Dad's arm, shaking him. Tell them she is crazy. You were there. You saw it. It was an accident." Dad stood up. He moved slowly, like a man waking up from a long, deep sleep. He looked at Valerie's hand on his arm. Then he looked at me. He looked at the scar I was pointing to. "Stop the video," Dad said. His voice was hoarse. I signaled the booth. The screen went black. "Martin, please," Valerie hissed, lowering her voice, trying to regain control. "Don't let her do this. We can sue her for defamation." "Did you hit her?" Dad asked. It was a simple question, 3 words, but he asked it with a tone I had never heard him use with her before. It wasn't the tone of a husband asking a wife. It was the tone of a judge asking a defendant. "Martin, I told you," Valerie stammered, her eyes darting around the room, feeling the weight of the neighbors' stares. She was hysterical. She was tearing the papers. I tried to stop her, and she lunged at me. I put my hands up to defend myself. If she got hurt, it was her own fault. "She says you slapped her," Dad said. "She says you shoved her." "She is a liar," Valerie shrieked. "She has always been a liar. She hates me because I married you. She made it all up." "Mr. Pierce?" I said into the mic. Addison walked down the aisle. He was holding a remote control. "We anticipated this denial," Addison said. "The memory can be a tricky thing, Mrs. Carrington, but technology is usually quite reliable." He pointed the remote at the screen. "We obtained this footage from the security system of the house directly across the street," Addison explained. "The Gables installed a high-definition camera on their porch 2 weeks before Eleanor died. It points directly at your front door." The screen lit up again. It was a wide shot of our house. It was raining in the video, the day I left. The front door was open. You couldn't see the bedroom upstairs, but you could see the aftermath. The video showed the front door flying open. It showed me stumbling out, clutching my arm, and then it showed Valerie. She stepped out onto the porch. She was screaming. There was no audio, but her body language was unmistakable. She wasn't defensive. She was aggressive. She lunged toward me as I backed down the stairs, and then, clear as day, she shoved me. I stumbled on the wet steps in the video, catching myself on the railing. Valerie stood at the top of the stairs, shouting, pointing a finger, her face twisted in rage. Addison froze the frame right at the moment Valerie's hands made contact with my shoulders. "That," Addison said, his voice echoing in the silent theater, "is assault, and under the terms of the Eleanor Legacy Trust, it is a breach of the non-aggression clause." Valerie stared at the screen. Her mouth worked, but no sound came out. The neighbors were whispering now. The sound was like a rising tide. "Did you see that? My God, she really pushed her. I always knew she was mean." Martin stared at the frozen image of his wife shoving his daughter. He looked at the woman in the blue dress standing next to him. He looked at the woman on the screen. They were the same person, but for the first time, He was seeing her without the filter of his own denial. He started to shake. It wasn't a tremble of fear. It was the tremble of a building about to collapse. "I asked you," Martin said, his voice quiet and broken. "I asked you that day. I came upstairs. I saw her face. I saw the mark. And I asked you what happened." "Martin, listen to me," Valerie pleaded, grabbing his lapels. "It looks worse than it was. I was stressed. My mother-in-law had just died. I was grieving." "You told me she fell," Martin said, pulling away from her. "You told me she was throwing things. You made me believe my daughter was the aggressor." He looked up at me on the stage. His eyes were full of water. "I let you leave," he whispered. "I let you drive away in the rain because I believed her." "Yes," I said. "You did." "It is just a house," Valerie screamed, losing it completely. "Who cares? It is just a stupid, rotting house. You are going to let her ruin our marriage over a house?" Addison stepped forward. He placed a thick file folder on the small table in front of the first row. The sound of the heavy paper hitting the wood was like a gunshot. "It is not just the house, Valerie," Addison said. "This file contains 10 years of bank statements. It proves you have been siphoning money from Martin and Eleanor to pay for your lifestyle. It proves you took out a second mortgage on the property without Martin's knowledge. It proves fraud." The room gasped again. A second mortgage, in a small town like Ridgefield. That was a scandal of biblical proportions. Martin looked at the file. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. The look on Valerie's face was confession enough. "A second mortgage?" Martin asked. "But the house is paid off. My dad paid it off in '85. "Not anymore," Addison said. "She leveraged it 2 years ago. You are currently 3 months behind on payments. If Lena hadn't stepped in to cover the arrears through the trust, the bank would have posted a foreclosure notice on your door next week." Martin turned to Valerie. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. "You spent it all? The retirement? The equity? Everything?" Valerie stepped back. She looked around the room, searching for an ally, searching for anyone who would buy her act. But the faces of the neighbors were cold. The faces of the family were hard. She was alone. "I did it for us," she cried, desperate tears streaming down her face now. "I wanted us to have nice things. Martin, I wanted us to be happy. You were always so cheap, just like your mother. I had to do it." Martin closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. When he opened them, the fog that had covered his eyes for 15 years was gone. He turned his back on her. He walked toward the stage. He didn't run. He didn't yell. He just walked until he was standing at the foot of the podium where I stood. "I am sorry," he said. He didn't say it to the room. He said it to me. "I know," I said. "Mr. Pierce," Martin said, not turning around. "What happens now?" Addison cleared his throat. "From tonight, the provisions of the will are absolute. The entire estate transfers to Lena Carrington. Because of the assault, Valerie is removed as a beneficiary of any kind. She has no right to reside in the home. She has no claim to the stipend." Addison paused. "The only question remaining," the lawyer said, "is where you stand, Martin. You can contest this. You can try to fight for her in court, or you can accept your mother's judgment." Martin looked at the video screen, where Grandma's face was still frozen, watching over us. Then he looked at Valerie, who was sobbing in the aisle, a mess of blue silk and ruined mascara. "She lied to me," Martin said. "She hit my child, and she stole my mother's legacy." He looked up at me. "I don't want to fight," he said. "I am done fighting for the wrong side." I put down the microphone. I walked to the edge of the stage and sat down, my legs dangling over the edge. Suddenly, just a daughter again. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the thin, translucent letter I had found in the tin box, the one Grandma had written to him but never sent. "She left this for you too," I said, handing it to him. "Read it. It is the last thing she wanted you to know." Martin took the letter. His hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. He sat down right there on the steps of the stage, oblivious to the 200 people watching him. He unfolded the paper. Behind him, Valerie realized it was over. She looked at the hostile faces of the neighbors. She looked at Addison, who was checking his watch as if bored. She looked at her husband's back. She turned and ran. The sound of her heels clattering against the floor tiles echoed through the silent theater as she fled the scene of her public execution. Nobody went after her. We just watched Martin read. The silence in the Rialto Theater was heavier than any noise I had ever heard. It was a physical weight, pressing down on the velvet seats and the fresh carpet. 200 people held their breath, their eyes fixed on the man sitting on the steps of the stage. My father, Martin, finished reading the thin, translucent letter I had given him, the letter his mother had written but never sent. He folded it slowly, his movements heavy and stiff. In the span of 20 minutes, under the harsh light of the truth, he seemed to have aged 10 years. His posture, usually so upright in his attempt to keep the peace, had collapsed. He looked at the legal file Addison had placed on the table. He looked toward the back of the theater, where Valerie had stopped near the exit doors, unable to leave without trying to salvage her reputation. Then, finally, he looked at me. I thought I was keeping the family together, Martin said. His voice was not amplified by a microphone, but in the dead quiet of the room, it carried to the back row. I told myself that if I just kept her happy, if I just let things slide, we would be okay. He stood up, wiping a hand over his face. I was wrong. I let my fear of being alone be bigger than the loneliness of my own daughter. At the back of the room, Valerie spun around. She had been hesitating at the double doors, her hand on the brass bar, but my father's admission snapped something inside her. She marched back down the aisle, her face twisted into a snarl that ruined the facade she had spent a decade perfecting. "Oh, stop it!" Valerie screamed. Her voice was shrill, bouncing off the acoustical tiles. "Stop being such a martyr! Martin, look at this! Look at what she has done!" She pointed a shaking finger at me. "This isn't about truth. This is a production. She bought a theater. Martin, she hired a lawyer. She set up lights and cameras. It is a play. She is directing a scene to humiliate me because she is jealous. She has always been jealous that you chose me." She turned to the audience, spreading her arms wide in a plea that looked more like a threat. "You all know how children are. They make things up. They cry for attention. She was a moody, difficult teenager who hated having a stepmother, and now she has come back with money to bully us. She is buying her way into your sympathy. She is 30 years old, Valerie." The voice came from the third row. It was Mrs. Gable, the neighbor whose security camera had captured the assault. She stood up, clutching her purse. "And she didn't buy that video," Mrs. Gable said firmly. "We all saw what you did, and we all saw how you treated Eleanor." Then, my Aunt Sarah stood up on the other side of the aisle. "I saw you take the checkbook, Valerie," she said, her voice shaking with anger. 3 years ago, at the Christmas party, I saw you slip Eleanor's checkbook into your purse. When I asked you about it, you said you were holding it for safekeeping. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to cause a scene. I should have caused a scene. I saw you turn Lena away at the door when she came to visit." Another neighbor, Mr. Henderson, called out from the back. "You told her Martin wasn't home, but his truck was in the driveway." The dam broke. One by one, the people of Ridgefield stood up. They weren't testifying in a court of law. They were testifying to the reality they had ignored for too long. They laid out the pieces of the puzzle, the snide comments, the sudden vacations, the way Grandma stopped coming to bingo because she couldn't afford the gas money. Valerie looked around, her eyes wide and frantic. She was losing control of the room. She was losing the audience. "You are all lying," she shrieked, backing away. "You are just jealous because we have a nice life. You are all pathetic." "Enough, Valerie." Martin's voice was low, but it cut through her screaming like a blade. He walked down the aisle until he was standing face to face with her. "Martin, tell them," she pleaded, grabbing his lapels again. "Tell them to stop." "I said enough," Martin said. He reached up and gently but firmly removed her hands from his jacket. You are not going to speak for this family anymore. You are not going to speak for me. And for the first time in 15 years, you are going to be quiet so I can hear my daughter." He turned his back on her and looked at me. I was still sitting on the edge of the stage. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel the rush of adrenaline I thought I would feel. I just felt tired and sad and incredibly relieved. "Lena," Dad said, "I can fight this. We can go to court. I can try to save the house from the bank. But I need to know what you want. Do you want the house? Is that what this is for?" I looked at him. I looked at the screen where Grandma's face was frozen in a permanent expression of protective love. "I don't need the house, Dad," I said softly. "I have a home. I built it myself." I hopped off the stage and walked over to him. "I don't want the house if the price is you looking away when I'm bleeding. I don't want the money if it means I have to pretend she's a good person. I just needed you to know. I needed you to know what was in that letter, and I needed you to know that Grandma saw you. She saw me, and she loved us enough to force us to look at each other." Martin nodded. Tears were streaming down his face now, unchecked. "I see you, Lena," he whispered. "I see you." He turned to Addison, who was standing quietly by the table with the file. "Where do I sign?" "Right here," Addison said, producing a pen. "This is a waiver of contest. By signing this, you agree that the new will is valid. You agree to the transfer of all assets to the Eleanor Legacy Trust, and you acknowledge the activation of the removal clause regarding Valerie Carrington." Martin didn't hesitate. He didn't look at Valerie. He bent down and signed his name with a firm hand. "And this," Addison said, sliding a second document forward, "this authorizes me to contact the bank and separate your name from any joint accounts held with Valerie, protecting whatever credit you have left." Martin signed that too. Valerie let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. "You are leaving me? After everything I did for you? You are going to let her throw me on the street?" "You threw yourself on the street, Val," Martin said, straightening up. "You spent the money. You hit my child. You leveraged the house. I am not leaving you. I am just finally agreeing with my mother." He looked at her with a devastating finality. "You should go, before Addison calls the police for the assault." Valerie looked at him. She looked at me. She looked at the 200 witnesses. She realized there was no play left to run. There was no lie big enough to cover this. She turned on her heel. She walked out of the Rialto Theater, the click-clack of her heels fading into the rainy night. No one ran after her. No one offered her a ride. Even Kyle, her golden boy, was nowhere to be seen. He had stayed away. Perhaps because he knew this day was coming, or perhaps because even he couldn't stomach the defense of the indefensible. The room exhaled. The neighbors lingered for a while, drinking tea, eating the cookies, patting Dad on the back. They offered apologies for not speaking up sooner. Dad accepted them with grace, but I could see the shame burning in his eyes. He knew that the silence of good people had been just as damaging as Valerie's noise. Slowly, the theater emptied. The tech crew packed up. Addison shook my hand, gave Dad a business card with instructions for the next morning, and left. Eventually, it was just me and Dad. We stood in the center aisle, bathed in the soft glow of the safety lights. The smell of popcorn and old velvet hung in the air. "I am sorry," Dad said again. "I know words don't fix it. I know I can't give you back the last 10 years. "No," I said. "You can't." "I want to fix it," he said. "I don't know how. I am an old man with a mortgaged house and no wife. I don't have much to offer." "You have this place," I said, gesturing to the theater. "I bought it, but I can't run it from Harbor City. It needs a manager. It needs someone who knows how to fix things." Dad looked around at the restored walls. "You want me to run a movie theater?" "I want you to run a community center," I corrected him. "I am keeping the house. Dad, I am not selling it, but I'm not living in it either. I am turning it into a weekend retreat for the family, for Aunt Sarah, for the cousins, and for you, if you want to visit. But this place, this theater, I want to turn it into a space for kids who don't have anywhere else to go. kids who feel like they are invisible at home. I looked him in the eye. I am using the money from the trust to set up the Eleanor Vance Scholarship. It will pay for tuition for students who need to get out of Ridgefield to find themselves. I want you to help me find those kids. Dad swallowed hard. He nodded. I can do that. I would like that. He looked at the screen, which was now blank. She was a tough woman, your grandmother. She had to be, I said. Lena, Dad said, shifting his weight. Can I ask you for one thing? What? Can you write me a letter? I frowned. A letter? Ma left me a letter, he said, but I had to wait until she was dead to read it. I don't want to wait until you are gone to know what you are thinking. Can you give me a letter? Tell me what I need to do. Tell me the rules. If you want me to be your father again, tell me how. I smiled. I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer. I wrote it last night, I said. I pulled out a white envelope. It wasn't blue bordered. It wasn't legal stationery. It was just a plain letter. It is not a will, I said, handing it to him. It is a list. It is a list of boundaries. It is a list of things we are going to talk about and things we are never going to ignore again. If you want to be in my life, Martin Carrington, you have to read every word. He took the envelope with both hands. I will read it, I promise. Good, I said. Now, sit down. I want to watch the end of the video with you. Martin sat in the center seat. He opened my letter, angling it toward the aisle light. I walked up to the booth one last time. I hit a button. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't the legal reading anymore. It was the end of the tape, the part Addison hadn't shown the crowd. It was Grandma, holding the camera herself, filming clumsily. She turned the lens to show me, sitting in the hospital chair, asleep with my head on the bed rail. Then she turned the lens back to herself. She is sleeping, Grandma whispered to the camera. She looks so peaceful. Martin, if you are seeing this, take care of her. She is the best thing we ever did. In the dark theater, I walked down and sat next to my father. He was reading my letter, tears dropping onto the page. I looked at the screen where Grandma, me, and by extension, Dad, were finally sharing the same frame. The ghosts were gone, the house was safe, and for the first time in a long time, the silence wasn't heavy, it was just peace. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but sometimes the hardest stories are the ones that set you free. Sometimes, the worst hit isn't the slap across the face. It is the years of being told you don't matter. It is the silence when you need someone to speak up. My grandmother's letter gave me my voice back, but what I chose to do with it was the real revenge. I didn't destroy them with fire. I destroyed their privilege of staying silent. So, Paz, I have to ask you, if there is a letter in your life that is being hidden, a truth, a boundary, or a wish, what are you going to do? A. Stay silent to keep the surface smooth? Or B. Read it out loud, even if the person who hurt you is sitting in the front row? Please let me know in the comments which option you would choose, and tell me where you are listening from. I'd love to know how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can get this story heard by more people who might need to know they aren't alone.